You keep saying professional foreigner, and I keep pretending like I know what that means.
So today we're talking about anti-Asian hate, how Asians get treated like we don't belong, and the importance of Asian American studies and ethnic studies on campus, especially at UMass Boston. This is our hashtag Asian American Studies social media project. Let's talk about it. So what does perpetual foreigner really mean? Let's say you grew up here, you take the same tea as everyone else, you experience the same weather, you feel like you really belong here. And then someone comes up to you and they ask,
Yo, where are you really from?
"Oh, I'm from Boston."
Yeah, I get that, but where are you really from?
That was an example of the perpetual foreigner stereotype. It is the idea that Asians, even though they've lived here all their lives, never truly belonged. You hear it in comments such as, "Go back to where you came from," or "You speak English so well." Even though these are casual comments, they reinforce the idea that Asian Americans never really belonged, especially during times of fear, tension, or crisis. A few patterns show up when we talk about anti-Asian sentiment. One of the patterns we've already talked about is the perpetual foreigner stereotype. Another one that we haven't talked about is the model minority myth. It's a myth that's supposed to say that Asian Americans are supposed to be this hardworking, smart, quiet group of people. It kind of says that if we can do it, then so can everyone else. Another one that we haven't yet talked about is the yellow peril. So what is the yellow peril? Yellow peril sort of frames Asians as this danger to Western society, that we are thieves, spies, people who carry diseases.
Which part of that hits you most?
I would say the model minority myth, just because it feels harmless. It feels like it's supposed to be positive, you know, like people think that it's good to be seen as smart. It's good to be seen as hardworking.
But doesn't that also turn into a stereotype?
Well, it is a stereotype. So I think that's where that the harm is that people don't really see it as a stereotype. They don't really see the harmful impacts of it.
In the late 1800s, Chinese workers helped build railroads and worked some of the lowest paid and most dangerous jobs in the United States. As economic fears grew, white politicians and labor leaders blamed them for job loss. In 1882, Congress passed the Chinese Exclusion Act, sharply restricting Chinese immigration and demonstrating that the country wanted Chinese labor and not Chinese belonging. Almost a century later, in 1982, Vincent Chin, a Chinese-American man in Detroit, was beaten to death by two white automotive workers who blamed Japanese vehicles for plant closure. They received probation and fines, but no prison time. In 2021, a white gunman attacked 3 massage businesses in the Atlanta area, killed 8 people, 6 of them Asian-American women, and early coverage repeated this sex addiction framing, which shifted focus away from the racial and gender patterns in his targets.
I feel like in the grand scheme of things, these aren't really isolated incidences.
How so?
Well, if we look out throughout history, we see things like the Chinese Exclusion Act, which excluded or prevented Chinese immigrants from coming into the country. We look at things like the Japanese internment camps, where not only were Japanese imprisoned, but their allegiance was tested. They were questioned whether or not they were true citizens of the United States. And even in the past 5 years, we look at things like COVID-19 and how that affected a lot of East Asians or even just Chinese people because, you know, a politician's coining the term China virus.
Has any of those events turned violent?
Well, according to studies done during like 2021 by Stop API Hate, I would say that, yeah, I would say that they were pretty violent. I think there was a lot of attacks on elderly people during that time, elderly Asian people. There were a lot of hate crimes against Asian Americans, and even myself, I've experienced a lot of hate crimes during that time period, just from either police or even other people. You know, people would say that I was the cause of COVID, or every time that I would cough, you know, they would say that I had COVID, but they wouldn't say that to anyone else.
When COVID hit, Asians were verbally harassed and shunned with slurs. They were blamed for the virus, go back comments, or deliberate coughing and spitting. Some were physically assaulted and denied service in public places. So, what was COVID like for you?
Well, COVID was very isolating for me. I remember being isolated, like obviously physically, but also emotionally and socially. I felt as though I couldn't communicate with other people, and it was around the same time that I had actually graduated high school. COVID had just happened during that time, and I was going into college for the first time, not knowing how to handle college or even just going into Zoom. And I think the year that really impacted me the most was 2021. During that time period, I know that Stop AAPI Hate had already gathered a lot of research in regards to COVID-19 and also just hate crimes in general. And I was part of the Asian student organizations at my college at the time. While I was there, we really wanted to promote and spread awareness about Stop Asian Hate and also just Asian hate crimes in general. At the same time, there was the murder of George Floyd, and other student leaders felt as though that Stop Asian Hate, they didn't want to really contribute or talk about that because they felt like it would overshadow the Black Lives Matter movement or even just the murder of George Floyd. And I was really confused at the time because I felt as though, why couldn't we do both? And that was something that I had to carry with me.
Why don't Asian Americans speak out against model minority myth?
Well, you got to look at the context of what Asian Americans kind of had to go through, throughout their history, in the United States. So obviously, the first thing I want to say is not all Asian Americans experience the same thing. So individual groups have different contexts for coming into the United States. So that's just one of the things that is important to know. It's relevant to mention that for a lot of these groups, coming to the United States was for survival purposes. Not a lot of them had a lot of opportunities in the United States, and in some cases they were restricted from doing a lot of things.
And that was during the Chinese Exclusionary Act and also the Japanese encampments, right?
Chinese Exclusion Act, Japanese internment camps. You can even say COVID-19. You can say, for example, another event that we haven't yet mentioned is Saigu, when we're talking about the aftermath of the LA Rodney King riots. That you could see that as a form of survival, where a lot of Korean families had to basically defend their businesses against riots. The police never responded to Koreatown after the LA Rodney King riots. A lot of the things that we do as an Asian American community is for survival. And when we tie it back to the model minority myth, we have to remember that if you're put into a situation of survival and there is this opportunity or even just glimmer of notion that you are to be respected or even just held to a different standard, it's hard to speak out against that as a community. But again, like we mentioned earlier, it's harmful. We have to talk about these things because they don't just impact us, but they impact communities. They pit us against other communities. Individual context matters when we're talking about the Asian American experience. That being said, in a national survey conducted, more than 50% of people couldn't name a single event or policy relating to Asian American history. This is why ethnic studies is important. It not only prevents the erasure of our context and history, but it teaches us that we really do belong and that we have a voice.
In the 2025 report, 40% of Americans said that Asian Americans are more loyal to their countries of origin than the United States, and more than a quarter said Chinese Americans are a threat to American society and national security. Asian Americans in the same survey reported something different. Most felt unsafe. In at least one daily setting, nearly half have been insulted or been called a slur in the past year because of their race, along with harassments, threats, and physical attacks.
At the same time, many of these programs are working without a space. We are currently in front of the Asian American Studies department that is under construction. Many of the professors who are in this department do not have a space to work and students cannot meet them.
At UMass Boston, Asian American Studies and other ethnic programs exist inside this exact same climate. The campus is a part of the federal Asian American, Native American, Pacific Islanders Serving Institution program, which supports advising, mentoring, and programming for Asian American and Pacific Islander students, especially those who are first-generation, working-class immigrants or refugees. In 2025, funding for minority serving institutions, including the Asian American, Native American, Pacific Islander Serving Institutions, were cut, Losing or shrinking of these grants could mean fewer advisors, fewer classes, and cuts to programs that serve marginalized students. In practice, ethnic study programs are asked to address racism and belonging, while their funding and physical space remain fragile. Nearby in our local communities, Dorchester, Quincy, Revere, and Lynn, changes in resettlement agreements and deportation policies threaten our communities. On campus and in our neighborhood, the same question emerges: who is treated as someone who belongs, and who is treated as someone the system can displace?
What can we do with all this information? Let's start by petitioning to have UMass Boston incorporate ethnic studies into the core curriculum. We can also start by joining your local community organizations like Asian American Resource Workshop. Finally, we can also utilize our voices to uplift ourselves and others in our community. Let's talk about it, but let's also do something about it.